Welcome to Quiz Time. We're talking about world history today, and I've got 100 questions for you to test your memory, to see what you know, to have fun learning stuff. It keeps us young, you know. All right, let's get right to it, shall we? Which 14th century African empire established renowned libraries and universities that drew Islamic scholars from afar? The Mali Empire, the Ghana Empire, or the Songhai Empire? That would be the Mali Empire. Which decisive 1805 battle showcased Napoleon's tactical genius in defeating the united Russian and Austrian armies? The Battle of Austerlitz, the Battle of Leipzig, or the Battle of Wagram? That was the Battle of Austerlitz. Which treaty, signed in 1842, ended the First Opium War and transferred Hong Kong's rule to Britain? The Treaty of Tientsin, the Treaty of Nanking, or the Convention of Peking? It was the Treaty of Nanking. Which global conflict in the 19th century involved the Crimean Peninsula, introducing war photography and nursing reforms? The Franco-Prussian War, the Crimean War, or was it the Austro-Prussian War? And that was the Crimean War. Which Persian king authorized Jews to leave the Babylonian exile and rebuild their sacred temple in Jerusalem? Darius I, Xerxes I, or was it Cyrus the Great? It was Cyrus the Great. Which nation was the earliest to allow women full voting rights in nationwide elections, setting a global precedent? New Zealand, Finland, or Canada? And that nation was New Zealand. Who led the Haitian Revolution, defeating French forces and establishing the first black-led republic in the Americas? Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Toussaint Louverture, or Henri Christophe? It was Toussaint Louverture. What historic naval battle in 1571 marked the largest sea clash between Christian Europe and the Ottoman Empire? Was it the Battle of Lepanto, the Battle of Trafalgar, or the Battle of the Nile? It was the Battle of Lepanto. Which 20th century conference saw Allied leaders plan post-war Europe's division, including Germany's occupation zones? Was it the Yalta Conference, the Potsdam Conference, or the Tehran Conference? It was the Yalta Conference. What was the 1947 plan by the U.S. to aid European recovery and prevent communism after World War II? The Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, or the Eisenhower Initiative? It was the Marshall Plan. Which Mongol ruler converted to Islam and led the Ilkhanate during the 13th century expansion into Persia? Hulagu Khan, Ghazan Khan, or Kublai Khan? It was Ghazan Khan. What rebellion in India during 1857 began as a mutiny but evolved into a major anti-colonial resistance movement? Was it the Sepoy Rebellion, the Boxer Rebellion, or the Deccan Uprising? It was a Sepoy Rebellion. Which Egyptian queen assumed full pharaonic power, adopting male titles and dress while ruling as sovereign? Nefertiti, Cleopatra VII, or Hatshepsut? It was Hatshepsut. Who led the Protestant forces in the 30 Years' War and died at the Battle of Lutzen in 1632? Was it Gustavus Adolphus, Oliver Cromwell, or Wallenstein? It was Gustavus Adolphus. Which 12th century Islamic leader recaptured Jerusalem from the Crusaders, prompting the launch of the Third Crusade? Suleiman, Babyars, or Saladin? It was Saladin. Which war between 1904 and 1905 saw an Asian nation defeat a European empire for the first time? Was the Russo-Japanese War? Was it the Boxer War? Or was it the Crimean War? It was the Russo-Japanese War. Which Roman Empire first embraced Christianity and issued the Edict of Milan to legalize the religion? Constantine, Augustus, or Theodosius? That would be the Emperor Constantine. Which civilization developed the world's earliest known legal code, predating Roman law by more than a millennium? Was it the Babylonians, the Hittites, or the Sumerians? And that was the Babylonians. Which ruler initiated the Meiji Restoration, dramatically modernizing Japan's military, economy, and political structure in the 19th century? Emperor Hirohito, Emperor Meiji, or Shogun Tokugawa? It was Emperor Meiji. Which medieval African kingdom traded gold for salt across the Sahara, controlling routes to North African markets? Was it the Ghana Empire, the Benin Kingdom, or the Aksumite Kingdom? It was the Ghana Empire. Which treaty in 1494 divided newly discovered lands between Spain and Portugal before most of the world was mapped? The Treaty of Utrecht, the Treaty of Tordesillas, or the Treaty of Paris? It was the Treaty of Tordesillas. What catastrophic volcanic eruption in 1815 led to global cooling and the infamous year without a summer? Was it Krakatoa, Tambora, or Vesuvius? It was the eruption of Tambora. Who commanded the Allied forces on D-Day and later became President of the United States? Was that Douglas MacArthur? Was it Dwight D. Eisenhower? Or was it George S. Patton? And that would be Dwight D. Eisenhower. Which Nordic nation remained neutral in both world wars, avoiding conflict despite neighboring powerful warring states? Was that Denmark, Norway, or Sweden? And that neutral country was Sweden. Which 325 AD council unified Christian beliefs and formally introduced the Nicene Creed as a doctrinal standard? Was it the Council of Trent, the Council of Nicaea, or the Council of Ephesus? It was the Council of Nicaea. Which explorer's crew completed the first circumnavigation of the globe after he was killed in the Philippines? Ferdinand Magellan, Vasco da Gama, or James Cook? And it was the crew belonging to the former Ferdinand Magellan. Who established the Qin dynasty and became China's first emperor, uniting warring states under centralized rule? Liu Bang, Qin Shi Huang, or Sun Tzu? And that was Qin Shi Huang. Which 1948 declaration by the UN set global human rights standards after the atrocities of World War II? Was it the Geneva Conventions, the UN Charter, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? It was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Which 1530s English ruler separated from the Catholic Church and founded the independent Church of England? Henry VIII, Edward VI, or James I? And that would be Henry VIII. Which ancient trade route stretched from China to the Mediterranean, spreading goods, ideas, and religions? Was that the Spice Route, the Silk Road, or the Amber Road? That was the Silk Road. Which early Islamic caliphate established Arabic as an administrative language across former Persian and Byzantine territories? Was it Rashidun, Umayyad, or Abbasid? And that would be Umayyad. What 17th century war in Central Europe killed a third of the population in some German-speaking regions? Was it the Austro-Prussian War, the 30 Years' War, or the War of the Spanish Succession? It was the 30 Years' War. Which 16th century revolt in the Low Countries contributed to the long-term decline of Spanish imperial dominance? Was it the Dutch Revolt, the French Wars of Religion, or the Peasants' War? And that was the Dutch Revolt. Which Ottoman ruler expanded the empire to its peak and was known for legal reforms and architectural patronage? Selim I, Mehmed II, or Suleiman the Magnificent? It was Suleiman the Magnificent. Which treaty ended World War I and imposed harsh penalties on Germany, contributing to future unrest? The Treaty of Versailles, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, or the Treaty of Saint-Germain? It was the Treaty of Versailles. Which 18th century conflict in North America was part of a larger global war involving European empires? The War of Jenkins' Ear, the French and Indian War, or was it Pontiac's War? It was the French and Indian War. Who was the military leader behind Prussia's unification efforts and its rise as a dominant German state? Was it Bismarck? Was it Frederick the Great? Or was it Moltke? It was Bismarck. What World War II conference led to the decision for Germany's unconditional surrender and Japan's defeat terms? Was it the Tehran Conference, the Potsdam Conference, or the San Francisco Conference? It was the Potsdam Conference. Which Chinese philosopher's teachings deeply shaped East Asian governance, education, and social behavior for centuries? Was it Laozi, Mozi, or Confucius? It was Confucius. What major revolt in 1791 led to Haiti becoming the first independent black republic? Was it the Dominican Rebellion, the Haiti Revolution, or the Maroon War? It was the Haitian Revolution. Which 20th century African leader resisted apartheid and later became South Africa's first black president? Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, or Steve Biko? It was Nelson Mandela. Which Cold War conflict saw U.S. and Soviet-backed forces clash during the Korean Peninsula's division in 1950? Was that the Korean War, the Vietnam War, or the Laos Crisis? That was the Korean War. Which ancient civilization built massive pyramids at Meroe and had a matrilineal tradition of royal succession? Carthaginian, Nubian, or Mycenaean? Matrilineal. Nubian. Which global event in 1918 caused more deaths worldwide than World War I itself? Was it the Spanish flu, the Russian Civil War, or the Balkan Wars? It was the Spanish flu. What 1830 revolution in France that replaced King Charles X with a constitutional monarchy under Louis Philippe? Was it the July Revolution, the French Commune, or the June Days? That would be the July Revolution. Which Egyptian ruler was defeated at the Battle of Actium, marking Rome's rise over Hellenistic territories? Was it Ramses II, Cleopatra VII, or Akhenaten? And that was Cleopatra VII. Which 19th century statesman unified Germany using strategic diplomacy and carefully orchestrated military conflicts? Was it Wilhelm I, Otto von Bismarck, or Metternich? And that would be Otto von Bismarck. Which massive medieval conflict between England and France included the battles of Agincourt and Crécy? Was that the Napoleonic Wars, the 100 Years' War, or the War of the Roses? It was the 100 Years' War. Which Spanish conquistador led the conquest of the Inca Empire in the early 16th century? Was it Hernán Cortés, Francisco Pizarro, or Pedro de Alvarado? And that Spanish conquistador was Francisco Pizarro. Which early American colony was founded by religious dissenters seeking separation from the Church of England? Was it Jamestown, Plymouth Colony, or Roanoke? And that was Plymouth Colony. What revolt in 1381 was led by commoners demanding economic reforms during England's post-Black Death labor crisis? Was it the Lollard Uprising, the Peasants' Revolt, or the Glencoe Rebellion? It was the Peasants' Revolt. Which empire developed cuneiform script, often cited as the first system of written language? Was it Assyrian, was it Akkadian, or was it Sumerian? And that script was Sumerian. Which pivotal 1066 battle transformed England's language, nobility, and cultural identity under Norman influence? Was it the Battle of Stamford Bridge? Was it the Battle of Hastings? Or was it the Battle of Bannockburn? It was the Battle of Hastings. What treaty ended the American Revolutionary War and formally recognized the United States independence? Was it the Treaty of Ghent, the Treaty of Paris, or was it the Jay Treaty? It was the Treaty of Paris. Which 1066 conflict reshaped England's aristocracy, language, and culture following the Norman conquest of the realm? Was it Florence, Genoa, or Venice? It was Venice. Which political theory, advocated by John Locke, heavily influenced democratic revolutions in America and France? Was it divine right, enlightened despotism, or was it the social contract? It was the social contract. Which battle in 1815 marked Napoleon's final defeat and reshaped European politics for decades? Was it the Battle of Leipzig, the Battle of Trafalgar, or the Battle of Waterloo? It was the Battle of Waterloo. Who was the astronomer tried by the Inquisition for supporting heliocentrism against church doctrine? Was it Kepler, Galileo, or Copernicus? It was Galileo that thought we revolved around the sun. Heresy. Which 19th century revolt across Europe aimed to establish liberal governments and national self-determination? Was it the revolutions of 1848, the Congress of Vienna, or the Paris Commune? It was the revolutions of 1848. Which medieval English document limited the power of the monarchy and laid the groundwork for constitutional law? Was it the Magna Carta, Habeas Corpus Act, or was it the Bill of Rights? It was the Magna Carta. Which 11th century event involved the excommunication of Eastern and Western church leaders, dividing Christianity permanently? Was it the Great Schism, the Council of Trent, or the Albigensian Crusade? It was the Great Schism. Which African king negotiated directly with Portugal in the 16th century, attempting to control the slave trade's impact? Was it King Ezana, Mansa Musa, or King Alfonso I? It was King Alfonso I. What fortress city held back multiple Ottoman sieges and became a symbol of Christian resistance in Eastern Europe? Was it Krakow, Vienna, or Belgrade? And that would be Belgrade. Which 7th century religious migration helped establish Islam's political foundations and is celebrated as Hijrah, the Mecca pilgrimage, the flight to Medina, or the night journey? It was the flight to Medina. Which naval battle during the Napoleonic Wars established Britain's dominance at sea for over a century? Was it the Battle of the Nile, the Battle of Trafalgar, or the Battle of Copenhagen? It was the Battle of Trafalgar. Which explorer was the first European to reach India by sea, drastically altering global trade? Bartolomeo Diaz, Vasco da Gama, or Amerigo Vespucci? It was Vasco da Gama. Which empire, centered in present-day Iran, was known for Shia Islam, fine textiles, and rivalry with the Ottomans? Was it the Mughal Empire, the Abbasid Caliphate, or the Safavid Empire? It was the Safavid Empire. Which 20th century alliance system created a balance of power that unintentionally escalated World War I? Was it the League of Nations, the Triple Entente, or the Non-Aligned Movement? It was the Triple Entente. Which political shift in Japan returned authority to the emperor and dismantled the shogunate system in 1868? Was it the Edo Reform, the Meiji Restoration, or the Tokugawa Collapse? It was the Meiji Restoration. Which early Mesopotamian city had advanced urban planning, ziggurats, and one of the first recorded kings? Was it Babylon, Uruk, or Nineveh? It was Uruk. Which revolution began in 1910, ousted Porfirio Diaz, and led to deep land reforms in Mexico? Was it the Cristero Rebellion, the Mexican Revolution, or the Zapatista movement? It was the Mexican Revolution. Which Germanic tribe famously sacked Rome in 410 AD, shaking the Western Roman Empire's sense of invincibility? Were they the Vandals, the Huns, or the Visigoths? They got sacked by the Visigoths. Which 15th century invention drastically increased book production and accelerated the spread of Renaissance ideas? Was it the compass? Was it the movable type printing press? Or was it astrolabe? It was the movable type printing press. What failed 1961 invasion aimed to overthrow Fidel Castro and was backed by the U.S. government? Was it Operation Condor, the Bay of Pigs invasion, or the Cuban Missile Crisis? It was the Bay of Pigs invasion. Which 1917 British statesman authored the Balfour Declaration, endorsing a Jewish homeland within Ottoman-controlled Palestine? Was it David Lloyd George, Arthur Balfour, or Neville Chamberlain? It was Arthur Balfour. Which 16th century Mughal emperor was known for religious tolerance, cultural fusion, and administrative innovation in India? Was it Shah Jahan, Babur, or Akbar the Great? It was Akbar the Great. Which pre-Columbian civilization developed terrace farming, suspension bridges, and ruled from Cusco? Was it Maya, Aztec, or Inca? It was the Incan civilization. Which 1962 Cold War standoff brought the superpowers dangerously close to nuclear war over missiles in Cuba? Was that the Korean Armistice, the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the Vietnam Tet Offensive? It was the Cuban Missile Crisis. Which ruler commissioned the construction of the Taj Mahal as a tomb for his beloved wife? Was it Humayun, Shah Jahan, or Jahangir? And that was Shah Jahan. Which 18th century conflict began in North America and evolved into a global war between colonial empires? Was it the American Revolutionary War, the French and Indian War, or the War of 1812? And it was the French and Indian War. Which 17th century English Revolution abolished the monarchy temporarily and executed King Charles I? Was it the Glorious Revolution, the English Civil War, or was it the Restoration? It was the English Civil War. Which Chinese dynasty built the Grand Canal and reintroduced Confucian bureaucracy after centuries of division? Was it the Tang Dynasty, the Ming Dynasty, or the Sui Dynasty? It was the Sui or the Sui Dynasty. Which 1937 event marked one of the worst atrocities by Japanese forces during the Second Sino-Japanese War? Was it the Battle of Midway, the Rape of Nanking, or the Manchurian Incident? It was the Rape of Nanking. Which king of Mali became famous for his pilgrimage to Mecca and spreading West African gold wealth? Was it Sundiata, Sunni Ali, or Mansa Musa? It was Mansa Musa. Which religious movement in 16th century Europe challenged papal authority and launched widespread reforms? Counter-Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, or the Christian Humanism? It was the Protestant Reformation. Which 1954 U.S. Supreme Court decision ruled that racial segregation in public education violated the Constitution? Was that Roe v. Wade, Was it Plessy versus Ferguson, or was it Brown versus the Board of Education? It was Brown versus the Board of Education. Which explorer mapped the Pacific Islands extensively and died in Hawaii during his final expedition? Was it Ferdinand Magellan? Was it James Cook? Or was it Henry Hudson? It was James Cook. Which early 20th century movement aimed to end imperial rule and establish a republic in China? Was it the Boxer Rebellion, the May 4th movement, or the Xinhai Revolution? It was the Xinhai Revolution. Which 16th century lawmaker of the Iroquois Confederacy is credited with uniting warring tribes peacefully? Was it Handsome Lake, Daganoweda, or Powhatan? It was Daganoweda. Which Italian thinker wrote The Prince as a political guide for rulers navigating power and manipulation? Was it Petrarch, Machiavelli, or Boccaccio? It was Machiavelli. Which medieval conflict resulted in Scotland's independence and featured William Wallace as a national figure? Was it the Anglo-Scottish War? Was it the Wars of Scottish Independence? Or was it the Jacobite Rising? It was the Wars of Scottish Independence. Which 20th century peacekeeping organization failed to prevent aggression by the Axis powers before World War II? Would that be the United Nations, the League of Nations, or NATO? And that would be the failure of the League of Nations. Which catastrophic 1986 event in Soviet Ukraine exposed critical global weaknesses in nuclear power safety systems? Was it Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, or Fukushima? It was Chernobyl. Which 18th century queen led Russia's expansion into Crimea and promoted Enlightenment ideals selectively? Was it Anna of Russia, Catherine the Great, or Elizabeth Petrovna? It was Catherine the Great. Which Chinese dynasty expanded territory, created civil service exams, and pioneered the use of paper currency? Was it the Yuan dynasty, the Tang dynasty, or the Song dynasty? That would be the Song dynasty. Which ancient city, buried by a volcanic eruption, preserved detailed records of Roman daily life? Was it Herculaneum, Rome, or Pompeii? And that would be Pompeii. Which American president's doctrine warned European powers against colonizing Latin America in the 1820s? Was it Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe, or Andrew Jackson? And that was the doctrine of James Monroe. Which early 20th century treaty dismembered the Ottoman Empire and redrew the Middle East political borders? Was the Treaty of Sèvres, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, or the Treaty of Lausanne? And that was the Treaty of Sèvres. Which 1957 event launched the space race and shocked Americans about Soviet scientific advancement? Was it the Vostok launch, Apollo 1, or the Sputnik launch? It was the Sputnik launch. And now question 100. Which Renaissance thinker painted anatomical drawings and conceptualized flying machines centuries before aviation existed? Was it Raphael, Galileo Galilei or Leonardo da Vinci? It was Leonardo da Vinci. And that, my friends, is all I've got for you. You've done an amazing job. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and share your score in the comments, please. And while you're here, check out these videos too. We like making them. We like having fun together and learning stuff. Thanks for playing. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.